All right, it's 7 o'clock, so I want to get started and be curious of everyone's time. So welcome, and thank you for joining us here for an incredible activist this evening. My name is Courtney Stubby. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a human services leadership major and an intern at the Women's Center. Tonight's event is part of UWO's celebration of Asian Heritage Month, Earth Month, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and Social Justice Week. The Women's Center would also like to give thanks to University Speaker Series, Women's Advocacy Council, CARE, and the Pepsi Fund for providing funding for tonight's speaker. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Amanda. Amanda Nguyen is the CEO and founder of RISE, a social movement accelerator. She is a 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Nguyen penned her own civil rights into existence and unanimously passed the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights after having navigated the broken criminal justice system after her own rape. 27 bills protecting more than 72 million sexual violence survivors have been created modeled off of her federal law. The federal law was the 21st bill in modern U.S. history to pass unanimously on the record. She has been named Forbes 30 Under 30, a top 100 leading global thinker by Foreign Policy, a Young Woman of the Year by Marie Claire, and the Tempest #1 Women of Color Trailblazer. Previously, Nguyen was appointed by President Barack Obama to the United States Department of State as his Deputy White House Liaison and served at NASA. Nguyen was the daughter of Vietnamese refugees and graduated from Harvard University. And she's an astronaut in training. It is my honor to turn over the virtual mic to Amanda Nguyen.
Hello, can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk about both sexual assault and about anti-Asian discrimination. For folks who aren't familiar, I have always been a nerd. That's how I introduce myself. And my background's actually in national security and astrophysics, so something that's really different from what I do day to day. Day to day, I run RISE. We are a civil rights accelerator, and what we do is we train people from all different walks of life and from all different types of issues that they fight about and help them pen their own civil rights into existence. Now, if you come along with me on a journey, the start of my activism, well, like so many people, started from a very personal place. My final semester at Harvard, I was raped. And I remember going to the hospital and getting a rape kit procedure, which is both life-saving medical attention and also the forensic collection of evidence from your body, because the crime scene is your body. My rape kit examination took 6 hours long. Most people don't know that it takes that long, 3 to 7 hours. And I remember walking out of the hospital feeling so alone. I had never been more fully aware of the definition of lonely until that moment. And gosh, I just remember thinking, well, where do I go from here? And I didn't have a lot of information that I thought were really basic. Like, well, where does the DNA samples taken from my body, where are they going to go? And what's going to happen to my evidence? And, well, where do I go from here? I turned to Google and found that it was actually really difficult to find out these answers. And I, at that time, had a resource. I had a Harvard Law professor, Diane Rosenfeld, who was one of the leading experts on, she still is, on women gender-based violence issues at Harvard Law. And she and I had the most difficult time trying to find these very basic answers. So I thought to myself, how difficult is the system? And I had no idea how broken the criminal justice system is and how stacked against survivors it is until I became one myself. Critically, I remember walking into my local area rape crisis center, and there weren't enough seats for us in the waiting room. And I thought to myself, if I have these resources and I'm struggling this hard, what is everybody else that doesn't have my resources? How are they going through this? And it was at that point that I realized that my story is not mine alone and that I had a choice. I could accept injustice or rewrite the law. So I rewrote it. Particularly in my case, I found out that in Massachusetts, rape kits untested would be destroyed at 6 months, even if the statute of limitations for that crime is 15 years. And I thought it was really unfair. Convicted rapists have the right to hold on to the evidence for the duration of their conviction. And other types of violent felonies never have their, like murder, don't have their evidence routinely destroyed, untested. So that's when I literally sent out an email to everyone that I knew. I was kind of shameless about it. I put my professors, my classmates, my former bosses, and I said, will you walk with me? Will you help me pen my own civil rights into existence? And people wrote back. You know, they were like, hey, I'm a nurse, how can I help? I'm a coder, how can I help? And honestly, I think one of the reasons why we were able to pass that bill, the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights, unanimously through the United States Congress is because of the diversity that we had at the drafting table, socially, economically, professionally. You know, being able to have different perspectives is how we built an inclusive piece of legislation. The bill became the 21st bill in modern U.S. history to pass unanimously on an on-the-record vote in both chambers of Congress. The statistic for that is 0.016%. But the most amazing part isn't that it passed like that. It's that we've repeated it 33 times. We just passed our 34th bill, so Montana, and it is on the governor's desk awaiting the signature. If it is signed into law, it'll be our 34th law. And it's not that we're like geniuses at this, it's that we learned the rules of how to pass legislation. You know, how can you win a game if you don't know the rules? And unfortunately, I think that our education system has failed us as Americans. I think that we aren't told, in fact, it's very spicy to say, but I think we're gaslit into forgetting our own power. I think the measure of a democracy is if you go out on the street and you ask people, do you feel like you have agency? Do you feel like you can actually write your own laws, that your voice matters? And if people say no, then how healthy is your democracy? And on top of that, there's a huge industry, lobbying, where you pay, and for that money, a lobbyist can give you access to power, to decision makers. But if democracy is up to the highest bidder, then is it accessible and democracy and representative after all? So that's one of the things that I realized after working through the bowels of Congress and these state houses, which is that when I looked around the room, I was the only one who looked like me. And oftentimes I would show up to these Senate meetings, even hearings, and people would not believe that I was there to either testify or that I wrote the bill or that I passed the bill. And the constant infantilization, I think a lot of women and non-binary individuals go through is in constant display. But I want to talk about a time where showing up really mattered. So state houses have legislative cycles, Congress does too, where there's a drop dead deadline. When session closes, then you have to start the process all over again. And this was the night before the deadline in Massachusetts. And I was living in DC at the time, so I was in the airport on my way to go to Boston to fight for my rights. I got a call from a senior advisor who said, "Hey, Amanda, I'm so sorry, but the speaker's not bringing up your bill for a vote. It's going to die." And I sat there sobbing in the airport bathroom because I was like, well, what's even the point of showing up if they're just going to slaughter my rights in front of me? And it was other survivors in solidarity who said, just show up, just go. Stand outside that door, and if they don't vote on it, make every single representative see your face as they walk out of the floor. And I remember being the last person on that plane. And when I got there, even our lead sponsors were like, "Hey, we're so sorry that this is not passing." And for 14 straight hours, the RISE team and I went to each senator and each representative and made our case. And at the end of the day, I watched the phone calls go into the speaker's office. The front office of the speaker was very irritated, but it was incredible. You know, like I had asked people on the interwebs to make a phone call into the speaker's office, and every single time the front office would pick it up, it was about the bill. And at the end of it, the speaker did bring it up for a vote, and it passed unanimously. And so I share this story because there are institutions and structures in place that try to make us forget the power that we have. I think one of the biggest forces of stagnating change is apathy, or even just blaming it on bureaucracy. Oh, there's not enough time for this. Oh, it's not the right time right now, but like maybe next time. And Martin Luther King has a very special quote to me, which is, "There's never a more convenient season for change." You think about that a lot. And I'll just, share another story. A lot of people ask me, well, how did you decide to take on the United States government? It's really intimidating. And if you look at my roots, it's not that intimidating because my mother was a boat refugee from Vietnam. She was my age. Well, gosh, now I'm older than she was. I'm about to turn 30. But she was in her mid-20s when she got accepted into college in Saigon. And she was the first person in her rural village of Bac Lieu to get accepted to this college. And I won't generalize, so I'll just say in her specific community, it was dishonorable at that time for women to seek higher education. The role of a woman was to stay home and take care of the family, take care of your parents. And her father found the books that she had hid and started burning them. And as he was burning them, he saw awards that she had hid fall out of them. And he was heartbroken. He let her go to college. But she never finished college because Saigon fell. And she decided with her family that running away to try to make it to another country was going to be the best way to save her family. She's one out of 12. And so the siblings got together and chose the people who would be making this journey and this sacrifice. She was one of them. And on the first time they tried to escape, they paid essentially what are human traffickers to traffic them out. However, these people took the money, and the place where they were supposed to meet, they put an origami boat, and they said, "This is the boat you're leaving off of." So essentially my family had paid and money was stolen. However, it was a lucky stroke because all those people died on that trip. Even though they were cheated out of a spot on it. But it set them back a couple years. So the second time they tried, my uncle he pretended to be a fisher a fisherman, and he was the captain of the boat. And they parked. It was a rainy night because they didn't want the Viet Cong outside. And they swam a quarter mile out to the boat. And as they were trying to make their escape, the Viet Cong caught them. And they sprayed gun bullets fired all around. And they said, "We're going to take you in now." However, at that very same moment, a bigger refugee boat was trying to escape. And refugees many of them carry gold with them because gold is translatable as value across different borders. So the guards thought that they would go get the other boat and come back to get my mother's boat. And as they were saying, "You guys stay here, we're going to go and we're going to come back for you," my mother turned to my uncle and said, we have to try. They're going to kill us either way. So we have to try to escape." And they did. They ran and they made it into international waters. Then they got caught up in a tidal wave storm. Their boat was sinking. Then pirates saved them. I'm going through this very fast because we don't have that much time. And then they made it into a Malaysian refugee island called Pulau Bidang. And, there's so much more to her story, but essentially she was probably your age for whomever is listening in right now, right? In young 20s, mid 20s. And for her to be able to go through that, she says, "I go into death to seek life. I went into death to seek life." What kind of audacity do you have, right, in order to believe in that? And if you have that ability to, well, then it is my responsibility to actually live out the privileges that I have in this country, right? Because she escaped so that she could have freedom, but also I have those freedoms afforded to me. I have those principles. Sometimes I like to think of this country as an experiment, because it is, and that it's up to every single generation to define pursuit of happiness, because we know that those founding fathers, though some people may have different opinions, would not recognize the America that we're in. So I don't believe in strict interpretation of the law. I believe in the spirit of the law. And I think that the idea of America, the promise, the creed, if you will, is really embodied in that pursuit of happiness clause. The idea that, yes, freedom means different things to different people, that we are always reiterating ourselves. We are always on this endless march to be a more perfect union. I have a funny story to share, which is that the way the actual Senate bill passed, the federal law, as it was passing through the Senate, at that time I was at Camp David, and I had a day job, and also I was an activist by night. And at Camp David, they take away all your phones. The Navy staff's Camp David, by the way, that's relevant for later. And at Camp David, that day was the day the final vote was going to happen on the federal law. And it was like, do or die. If, again, very similar to the Massachusetts story I told. So, either it passed this time or like we had to start the whole process again. And I remember after I used to train political appointees at Camp David. And so after a session, I remember trying really hard to find a portal into the outside world. And at the bar of Camp David, it's called Shangri-La, I saw, if you can just insert here, because I'm not a singer, but like a halo, like of angels singing, CSpan. I saw CSpan at the bar, and it was of the Senate floor, and it was them about to close session. So either they had already voted on my civil rights and I had them, or I didn't, or they were about to. And so I remembered from earlier that day at Camp David that the Camp David chaplain had a had a computer and a phone. And I'm not kidding you. So I don't know how to drive. It's a long story, but I ran out of the bar and I saw also insert here Halo music, angel sounds, golf cart one. And I thought to myself, I need it. And so I hijacked golf cart one, and as I pressed the gas pedal, I didn't realize that it was in reverse. So I literally screamed going backwards. And golf carts don't go very fast, but also, again, it's Camp David is staffed by naval officers, so they can like definitely, track me down. But they were so confused because here was this 20-something Asian girl screaming her head off, going backwards on golf cart one. And I crashed into a tree outside the chapel, and I ran in and I said, "Sir, you don't know me, but this is for 25 million rape survivors. Turn on CSpan. I need your phone." And he said to me, "I believe you. Take my phone." And I was able to jump on the line. I got to talk to Representative Zoe Lofgren, talk to her about, she was the Democratic lead sponsor of the bill, talk to her about where the bill was. It was about to go up for a vote, and I was able to negotiate it so that it would end up being the next thing being voted on before the session closed. And, I just, there's this video where I'm with my colleagues and I'm watching the senators read out their statements, and it's what happened was my teammates, went to a restaurant to celebrate, and I said, "I'll catch up with you in a second," but I took some time for myself, and I went to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where, if you've been to DC, you know that straight across from it is the reflection pool and the Capitol. And if anyone saw me at that moment, they would have thought that I had lost my mind, because I literally was standing there by myself, shrieking in tears and just hysterically laughing, like completely free from societal expectation. I just literally, it was the most both grounded to earth experience, and also paradoxically, like, it was justice. That's what justice feels like to me. And there's a tradition of people taking their painful living truths and channeling that into justice. And in that moment, I was crying, laughing, hysterical person, because hysteria was of the moment. How did a rape and so much pain, so much betrayal, the worst thing that happened to me wasn't being raped, it was being betrayed by the American criminal justice system, turn into reform for the nation, for millions of people? Justice means different things to different people, and so that was my form of it. And there's that moment that I hold on to when things get tough. And lately things have been tough. In February, I created a viral video that spoke about anti-Asian discrimination and the violence that's happening towards my community. And I asked the mainstream media to cover it. And I'm so glad that it sparked the conversation in the way that it did. And I just remember, when people ask me, well, can you share what kind of racism you've experienced? I think back to a thing that I said earlier in this call, which is that there was once an invitation that I had to testify in the United States Senate, and I was the consensus witness. So that means both Democrat and Republicans asked me to come. I had my invitation, and when I walked in, they refused to believe that I was there to testify. All of the witnesses were supposed to meet with the senators in this antechamber room before the hearing. And I sat in the waiting room. I was the only person of color witness. And I watched them escort the other witnesses in front of me to that room. It was humiliating. And it was only when one of the senator's counsels recognized me that she came. She was like, "I'm so sorry." And she brought me in. And, you know, it was so hurtful and so painful, because at that point I had already passed laws for this country and already served. And I was invited. I had proof. And yet, and the person that I reached out to, I think, is one of your former speakers, Alicia Garza. You know, she's a dear friend and mentor. I reached out to her and I said, "What do I do?" You know, and she said, "Just keep swimming." And I'm so grateful for women of color like her who have that solidarity and who have helped me through this. And in my own form of restorative justice, the next time that I was back in the United States Senate, it was because the Senate asked to do a hearing on my law, and they gave me the ability to choose who the witnesses would be, and I chose all people of color. And to walk back directly into that same room and to not be questioned, you know, for me at least, that was a little bit of healing. You know, I know that, you know, we're talking about both sexual assault awareness and also about anti-Asian discrimination. Of course, the recent massacre is the intersection of both gender-based violence and racial violence. And a lot of private conversations that I've had with the AAPI, with my Asian brothers and sisters, has been around speaking up and whether or not we can. You know, there's this, when I think about my mother coming here in that generation, I think there was an incredible piece that Hassan Minhaj did about his father's experience as a Muslim living in America, and how that was like the tax that they had to pay just to endure the racism in order to be here. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so I want folks to know that, first of all, again, it's up to every generation to define. And that, you know, we really aren't alone. I also want to address this victim to hero trope that I really reject. I want people to know that you don't have to put in the emotional, very difficult labor in order to change the systems, in order to validate whatever it is. Like, you could just be you, and that's fine, because joy is the most radical form of rebellion. So I want folks to know that, because sometimes, you know, survivors tell me, "Hey, you know, it's taken me some time to heal, and I feel guilty or some kind of way about not being able to do more for the movement." And I just want folks to know it is totally 1000% acceptable that you focus on you and you heal you. Because, again, justice is different for different people, but also movements are only as strong as, well, us, and as healthy as we are. And so joy, self-care, that is so important. Activism and advocacy for me are two different things, but are very important. I should say activism and organizing. Activism to me is direct voltage, and organizing is directed energy. And both are necessary in social movement building. But, you know, you can do both. I'll say that when I started my activism journey, I was fueled by rage. I was so mad at a broken criminal justice system. And after a while, that rage ran out. It's now turned into hope, after all these laws of passing, hope sustains. The difference between a dream and a hope for me is that dreams, you can, dream of anything. Hope is based in reality. You have to have a chance that it can be real. You have to have a plan, right? So it's dream plus strategy, a plan plus chance. That's hope for me. And I think the proudest thing that I am about is that these 33 laws that we've passed as a team hasn't been me. It's been other people who came with no political background and said, hey, I'm a community member and I just want to make sure that no one has to go through what I had to go through. And that they have been able to duplicate this effort 33 times over. Now we are fighting on the worldwide stage, the United Nations, and surprisingly or unsurprisingly, depending on how you look at it, the United Nations General Assembly has never passed a resolution about rape before, solely about rape. It's passed resolutions about rape as a weapon of war, or as rape as a subcategory of violence against women, but of course, non-binary men, boys are also impacted. So we've been fighting this fight. And it's a whole other ballgame when you're at the international stage. But one thing that helps break the ice is talking about something that returning to my roots, which is astrophysics. I know that sounds so lame, but when astronauts go into space for the first time, many of them experience what's called the overview effect. It's documented in psychiatric literature. Essentially, it's an existential crisis, and you are seeing everything that's ever lived or died on a pale blue dot. A lot of astronauts leave Earth as technicians, but return to Earth profoundly moved to change the world, to be humanitarians, to make sure that we understand this orbital perspective, as they say, that we are all on this floating spaceship Earth, this rock. And I think that you can get the overview effect without actually going to space, though I definitely still am planning on going to space. Astronauts like Leland Melvin, who is a mentor of mine, have been talking about this. I think a lot of Apollo astronauts also have reported this. And Leland has been a mentor to me. When I was making my decision to be an activist full-time, I went to Leland and I said, hey, I have a dream of being an astronaut, but I want to fight for this. And he said, Amanda, space is going to be there. It's going to be there long after you're gone. And so fight for your rights. And I'll be there to support you. And I'm so grateful to mentors and friends like Leland and like Alicia. Leland's mentor is Katherine Johnson, who was featured in Hidden Figures. And that would make a lot of sense now, looking back on it, why he cared so much about both space, but also encouraged me to pursue civil rights activism, because not all of my astronaut mentors shared that opinion. But I know that there are a lot of folks on here who might be thinking about their next steps in their professional career. And I want to say that we are multitudes. I mean, you don't have to choose one thing. I know that there's a lot of pressure, especially for folks who are about to graduate. I'll share with you that I'm 7 years out now from my graduation date. And I'm now having a lot of conversations with people, my classmates, my former classmates, who have said, Amanda, I went into, investment banking or consulting, and that's not what I really wanted to do. But now I don't know how to get out of it, and I don't feel like my life has purpose, or my work, my career. And I just want to say that if you want to go into these fields and that's what you want to do, like, go for it. But if you actually want to do something else, I think a lot of people bargain with themselves, right? Like, oh, hey, maybe I'll build some skills first before I like launch and do XYZ, my social movement, my activism, my nonprofit, whatever. If you do that, essentially what you're doing is you're betting against yourself, because there is nothing as useful as learning while you do it. So I understand where, especially as a daughter of refugees, that there are a lot of factors that come into play. For instance, financial security and choosing what your next steps are going to be, right? Or even, social pressure, prestige, family dynamics. What I'll just say is that my parents did not understand when I became an activist. First of all, as a Asian female in my community, speaking about rape was highly dishonorable. And I did it anyways. And it was painful to see that they didn't understand. But I also know that even though there is a lot of generational gap, education, values, whatever, that they came around. It took like a Nobel nomination for them to get around, but they came around. And I'm not saying that like you have to get a Nobel nomination in order to, convince whomever in your life that what you're fighting for is valid. However, what I'll say is I've never regretted it, even when it was difficult. And that there are only two people, I heard this actually on TikTok, so I don't know who to credit here, but that there are only two people that you need to make proud, and that's your 8-year-old you and 80-year-old you. So live out your values and your dreams, and don't bet against yourself. Go do it, and do what you love. It will be hard. You might not get it on your first try. It might take a long time. But I think when we look at history's change makers, innovators, the people who have broken barriers, all of them had haters. So just do what Taylor Swift says and shake them off. I think I'm getting that right. I'm not sure if that's her song, but I'll just end with this. The first time that I talked to politicians, it was many hours of me talking to people who did not care. So I was like, thank you for your brutal honesty, but I mean, this is like me starting out. And I remember one politician said, I sympathize with your rape, but my constituents don't know me for this. Another person said that they were too busy with their campaign, which, like, again, if you think about what politicians are meant to be, they're meant to serve the public, not just stay in power. So that's a conversation for another day. But it was hard, and I did go home and cry. And as a pathological optimist, the next day I got up again and I went to the United States Senate. And this time I took an Uber. I met a man, the driver, who was kind of intimidating, stoic, didn't really talk to me. And at the end of the ride, he saw that I was going to the Senate. So he was like, oh, where are you going? He asked me. And I told him. And this stranger just started crying, just tears welling out of his eyes. And he turned to me and he said, my daughter was also raped. And what you went through, she went through too. And when he stopped the car, he said, can I shake your hand? Thank you so much for fighting for my daughter. Has anyone told you that they love you today? I love you. And I have never forgotten that dad. That that father is representative of our shared story. It's a collective story. And if anything, it shows that no one is powerless when we come together, and no one is invisible when we demand to be seen. So thank you so much for seeing me today, and thank you so much for lending visibility to both Sexual Assault Awareness Month and also Anti-Asian Discrimination. I'm going to drink water now.
Wow, that was amazing. Honestly, I had chills throughout that entire thing. Thank you so much for all that you've done so far and everything you're going to do. So we will now move on to the Q&A portion of the event. Alicia is going to put up some guidelines in the chat and open the chat for everyone to ask questions. I'll let you kind of catch your breath for a second, but when you're ready, if you want to ask, I have a question that we can kind of start off with. So one of my favorite things that you said was joy is the most radical form of rebellion. I love that. I want that on a t-shirt. In the work that you do and all of the hardships that you see, and it's obviously not an easy topic to talk about every day, what brings you joy in your everyday life?
So it's such a nerdy answer, but I literally take out my telescope and I go to the reflection pool because it has the least amount of light pollution in DC proper. The other place is Rock Creek Park. But anyways, yeah, space really helps put things into perspective. You know, when you look at the sky and you see all the stars, you're actually looking at the past. I'm sure many of you know this. And I think it's so beautiful that that photon has traveled millions of years to reach your eye. And it makes me feel both so humble that we are but a blink of an eye in the universe, but also at the same time so special because we have the ability to feel and to be cognizant and to love and to also have pain. And that's the full human experience. So yeah, astrophysics. Also fashion and art.
Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'm sure it might take a second to type it out. We have a question from Julie saying, how did your love of astrophysics start?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, to be very honest, it started before my generation. You know, my uncle and my mom used the stars to navigate their way to freedom. And I've always thought that space to me represents not only the final frontier, which is, you know, very commonly said, but also this idea that we can imagine sci-fi. We can imagine a world that is not from a colonial perspective, right? So we can imagine what it would be like. And I love that about space.
I agree with Julie. She says, wow, that's a lot deeper than she thought. But it's amazing. So Angela has a question of what advice do you have for young activists? A lot of us are college students, wanting to start off, you know, not really sure what to start with. So what advice do you have?
The most powerful tool that we all have is our voice. And you can absolutely, I think social media has democratized a lot of people's voices. You can have and build your own platform. You can say what it is that you want to say. And there are these systems in place, these structures, for instance, that are channels of distribution, information distribution. So our education system, the federal government, the mainstream media, Hollywood, right? And I think social media has absolutely cut through that. And so, yes, it is a double-edged sword, but I would be, I mean, where I started off with was social media. I also started petitions on change.org to be able to rack up metrics of my support. That was very helpful. And then critically, it's narrative, it's storytelling. Stories are empathy machines, and figuring out what your clear call to action is, what success means to you, and specifically like a metric like based. So it's not like ending all poverty, but it's like specifically, what it is that will help with activism burnout, right? Because if you keep, fighting for an issue that has no end in sight, that's how people quit. So having a clear call to action, using social media, and defining, who the face of your movement is, or what your story and your connection to it is, because stories are so powerful in conveying why it is that people should care about what you're fighting for.
Another question would be, how does one start the process of becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm loving this. So there are 3 types of astronauts. One is a pilot, the second is the commander, and the third is a mission specialist. It's actually on USA Jobs. There are 2 types of astronauts. There's, I was gonna say pirates. Okay. Sure. Space pirates. There's NASA, there's like government routes, right? And then there's private sector, so that's like SpaceX. I'm interested to talk about the NASA one. The requirement is literally just a BA in STEM. Of course, it's like a lot more competitive than that, but that's just the requirement. Or a BS. Actually, it's BS plus 3 years working at a NASA mission directorate. And Leland's story, actually, of how he decided to apply is that one of his friends applied and got in, and Leland was like, if he could get in, I could get in. So that's how he applied. I think astronaut is one of those things that are so like pie in the sky that you're like, oh, it's a dream, like, can I actually get there? And then, no, it's actually like a feasible thing. And the other thing is that even if you get accepted into the astronaut corps, there's no guarantee that you will fly. So that's for a whole host of reasons. Space policy, one of which is that science is inherently, their missions are like 10 to 20 years long, but NASA is a government agency that is run by politicians at the end of the day, like the people who are at the very top, right? So who decides NASA's budget? Congress. I'm very passionate about this, so I can go on a long time. So to make it short, I can just say the president is the one that decides what missions are prioritized, and the presidential cycle is 4 to 8 years. Does not fit into a scientific 10 to 20 year thing. So you go into it loving the science and serving. Like that's your mentality, because you can't go in it for the glory, because first of all, like, there's a very real chance you will die. Because there are many astronauts who have given up their life for this, and it's because they believe in the science.
I really like how you mentioned how being an astronaut seems like such a far-fetch, when I'm looking at you thinking, wow, I don't know if I could do that someday. Astronaut's not really my thing, but activism, totally love. And another question we have is, have you ever considered running for office?
I did, and then I worked with Congress. And I decided, no, thank you. Look, I think that there are many ways to impact your country. So running for office is certainly a powerful way, and people should run for office. Unfortunately, I think I'll just speak about Congress. We're in such hyper-partisan times that it almost is political theater. And I have friends who are members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. And they are well-intentioned, good people who ran because they believed in things. And yet it's so difficult for them to get a law through. And it's because, you have a built-in 50% of people who already are there to just retaliate against you. So how do we actually legislate? How do we get things done? So that's where advocates come in, because we're able to come in and bring people to reality and say, hey, we're not here about that political stuff. We're here about people, right? And that has helped us pass laws.
Thank you. Another question is, what strategies have you found to be successful when working to secure bipartisan support for a cause or issue you're working on?
It's a great question. It's not for everyone, but a tool that we exercise a lot at RISE is radical empathy. The idea is that you see the humanity in someone who doesn't see the humanity in you. This is really hard to do. So what it is you climb over these very uncomfortable walls. I'll put a national security lens into it. In diplomacy, when you are negotiating with a dictator on nuclear proliferation, when you go into that room, you're not going to talk about anything else. You're going to talk about nuclear proliferation. Even if that dictator you hate for a whole host of other reasons and you want him to change XYZ things. So similarly, in what we call domestic diplomacy, there's a course that I teach. It's called Hopeonomics. You can take it at RISE. In fact, RISE Justice Labs, our organization, if you apply and you win a spot, we will give you money. We will give you money for your idea, because I think that the public service / nonprofit / activism industry is so prohibitive for people who have low income, who don't have resources to access, because the wages are so low that, in order for you to access it, you have to already have resources. Anyways, so we took the model from like startups, entrepreneurial Silicon Valley, where YC 500 startups, accelerators will literally, give seed funding to entrepreneurs and coach them to launch their product. The same thing, but for activism. It's called RISE Justice Labs. Check us out. But anyways, your question was about bipartisanship. And yeah, it's how do you go into a room and you have a very clear ask and you try to get them to a yes. It's a skill that we teach.
Thank you, and thank you, Alicia, for putting in the chat the website for RISE Justice Labs. Another question is, what is your advice for victims or survivors working to find healing?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that it's going to get better. And a very good therapist is helpful. However, people have different access to resources. What I would just say is that just know that you're not alone. Sometimes it feels like that. It feels so lonely that, even the people who say that they love you, they don't get it. They don't get the experience. And just know that the number one thing is your health and joy. Something that has helped me get through the day is what I call glimmers. I think this is, again, another TikTok concept. I don't remember who did this, but it's like the things that spark joy in a day that are tiny, right? Like, oh, there's a bird on my balcony, or oh, like I was able to walk outside today. So just being able to record that, even though it's so hard, and to look back, oh, today there were moments of joy. That has been really, really helpful. So yeah, just know that you are not alone and it gets better.
Thank you for that. I think a lot of people need to hear it, as unfortunately a very high statistic, and I really appreciate that. Um, I have another question, and before if anyone puts anything in the chat, I was at a speaker series not too long ago with female politicians. I'm sorry, I'm speaking very binary here, but it there was speakers from both sides, Democrat and Republican, and one thing that they agreed on was if there was more female leaders, we would see a lot more in common with each other, and it seems that it would be less divided. Is that something that you think would be possible or that you see?
Oh yeah, I 1,000% agree. In fact, there is a lot of theory around this. I will come at it from my background, which is national security. It's called inclusive security. So there have been studies about after conflicts, that de-escalation, renegotiation, all of these representation, all of these things when rebuilding a society, rebuilding a community and country after post-conflict areas, that if women are at the table, if women are leading those conversations, that the people of that community are served better because women are thinking, about this is Swanee Hunt's theory. So I'll just, again, sorry for the binary language here, but that women are thinking about children, the elderly, the most vulnerable, and that they're more likely to create more inclusive policies. So that has definitely been documented within studies.
Sorry, I lost track of time a little bit, but is there anything else you would like to leave us with?
Honestly, I hope you're just taking care of yourself. I it's been so wonderful to see you and to get to know the team. And I know that it's been what a year. So, if anything, I hope that anyone's listening today knows that your survival and existence is enough. That you are enough. You and your body got you here. And I truly, truly hope you know that, in a very corny but very real way, that we are all made out of stardust. So the light is already within you.
Wow, thank you. And thank you for sharing this virtual space with us this evening and inspiring us to take action in our own world, to be more equitable and just. And thank you to everyone who attended this evening. Before you leave, please complete the evaluation posted in the chat. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.